Hey, for our time together today, we've got author and pastor David Docusen with us. He recently released a book entitled Neighborliness, Finding the Beauty of God Across Dividing Lines. Right now, the best prices for this book are at neighborliness.com, but you can get the audiobook, the Kindle version, all that on Amazon as well. We're going to get into a lot of the different conversations that happen in church across dividing lines, and I'm really glad that you're with us tonight because I think this is going to be really interesting. So, David, I've known you for 20 years, something like that, and we could sit here and tell stories that would embarrass each other, but nobody really wants to hear that.
Let's not do that today.
You have more friends than I do.
That's another video.
Your friends would want to hear that.
Right.
But in my previous church, you helped us form some conversations around how the church is loving their neighbors, dealing with, in Baltimore, we had the Freddie Gray incident and several other things going on in the past 5 years. And we had some pretty in-depth conversations going on in the community. It seems like that conversation has really just exploded over the past 6-8 months nationally. And so places like Albemarle, we're having the conversation in different ways around how is the church living out the message of Jesus in light of what we see happening culturally.
Yeah.
And I want you to speak to this. You wrote a book, Neighborliness. Go get it on Amazon or Docusen.com. So talk to us about why you wrote the book and even speeding up the timeline of the release of the book.
Yeah. The book was intended to be a really practical tool for people to explore God's heart for what, through Jesus, he said was the most important thing, right? Is loving God and neighbors. And so the more that I studied in my doctoral program, I studied racial and economic injustice, and was in the context of living in Charlotte, pastoring for the last 10 years in Charlotte, right on the edge of the rich and the poor, a dividing line between predominantly white community and a predominantly black community.
So Freedom Drive.
Freedom Drive, right there, right by Bank of America Stadium. And so we were seeing it live out relationally, but that was also seeing it on a systemic level. I was studying the cyclical patterns of poverty and stuff like that. And so so the book, to me, the more that I studied that stuff, Nate, I just kept on being drawn back to the greatest commandment of if Jesus told us that loving God and neighbors was the most important thing that we could do, then what do you think the enemy's greatest plan would be? It would be to try and divide us from knowing each other well and try and distract us from loving God. And so I think what's happening right now in our culture is really important for us to understand issues of racial and economic injustice. But let's not forget, like, at the end of the day, our call is to love God and neighbors. And so it's our intimate time with the Lord, delight with the Lord. But then that naturally leads us into loving our neighbors. But I don't think that we can love each other very well if we're not seeking to understand each other. And so that's the idea behind the book, is can we learn how to understand people that are different than us?
Yeah, so let's jump into that a little deeper in just a minute. Talk to me a little bit about pastoring in that particular neighborhood in Charlotte, because I remember when you planted, you had a much different mindset when you first started out. So how did you it seems like this kind of happened upon you.
We started out, Nate, it was just the most simple and beautiful expression of faith. It was, a handful of people in my living room in Charlotte, 12 years ago now. And I just said, if this is real, it'll spread. And we decided to go completely word of mouth. And 5 years in, we were a couple hundred people. And I just got up there on a Sunday morning and looked out across our crowd. And I don't know why it took me so long, but I just looked out and I was like, wow, we all look alike.
Why did that bother you?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think it was just a moment of the reminder of the call that we had to Charlotte, which was we were drawn to Charlotte because of racial and economic diversity. When I look at the scriptures, I'm really drawn to the Apostle Paul, who went into Ephesus and Corinth, and he would go into these really diverse, volatile areas. But our word of mouth approach 5 years later was like people invite like people. And so we just all looked alike. And I think it was like this moment of realization that I didn't feel like we were fulfilling the call to really have a church that looked like our community. And so I just started to reach out to some pastors that I trusted that had really diverse churches. And the theme that kept on coming back to me is that I needed to start with a look inward first and explore my own heart and kind of audit the friendships in my life and even like the people that I was reading and allowing to influence my mind. And what I realized is it was a very homogenous expression of my faith. And I have to say this too, we loved that season of life. Like, I mean, it was the most generous, loving, caring community we'd ever been a part of. It just didn't look like the neighborhood that we were living in. And so really that journey started to open my eyes. What I noticed is that the more that I started to be curious about racial and economic things, the more that people that were experiencing the, kind of the harsh hands of oppression that try and hold people down in a lot of ways, I never understood that. And so the more that I was learning about it, the more that somebody that I was sitting next to, like face to face and looking them in the eye, would be like, yo, you know about this? Like, you know about like the prison system, some inequitable stuff with the criminal justice system, and all that stuff was like hot topic issues to me before. But then I was now talking to somebody. And it was the relationships that I had that were starting to open my eyes to God's beauty. And really that's where we ended up going with the book, was neighborliness, finding the beauty of God across dividing lines. And so, yeah, we ended up getting a phone call. I was coaching my son Jack's baseball team, and we were in between games and got a phone call, and somebody said, hey, there's an old warehouse on Freedom Drive where we want to convert it into a community center. We would love for your church to be a part of the project. And I was like, well, okay, like we'll explore it. And very, very fast forwarding of details, we ended up moving, and that was when we moved from a very affluent part of uptown Charlotte to right on the dividing line, where it goes from $500,000 houses to houses that back then you could have gotten for $30,000 or $40,000.
Obviously, everybody wasn't okay with that. I mean, you completely changed the mission of the church.
Yeah.
I mean, how dare you?
Yeah.
This is a church for 5 years that people
loved.
Like, this is my church.
Yeah.
We've got this mission, and then it's like all of a sudden 180 almost.
Yeah, and you know what, Nate? I think looking back, for a while I was like, I'm drawn to like challenges, right? And so when I start to see a problem, I run to it. That's just the way that I'm wired.
Yeah.
And if I'm just being really honest, man, I ran too fast at the beginning of this journey, because I was studying this stuff on a doctoral level, seeing systemic injustices that I had never seen before, while also building relationships with people that I had never built relationships before. And I wanted everybody to experience what I was experiencing. Okay. And what I've realized is that when we talk about racial and economic injustice, we probably need to let it be more like a slow drip, or like one of the metaphors that I think is helpful is like, if I need to put a 20-foot ladder up against my house to go get a hornet's nest, I'm not going to try and jump 5 rungs at a time just to get there quicker.
I mean, you threw out some words there in talking about what you saw as, the tension point of seeing a congregation that was homogenous, not diverse. Do you basically mean you just had a bunch of white people together?
Yeah, like it was a bunch of young, white, we're 95% middle class, upper middle class, uptown dwellers that all had similar interests for the most part, and so if you did an audit of like the demographics of our church, it would have been very skewed to one.
So how much of this tension is just fighting against human nature and what naturally happens in social groups, and how much of this do you think is related to theology and pastoring and shepherding? You know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of common for like people to gather together.
Yeah.
And are you? I don't want to answer it for you, but I do want to kind of set you up here because we know each other pretty well. But I want to ask the question that I hear really over and over and over. It's, what's the problem biblically with that?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that by nature, like, I don't know the demographics of Albemarle, but let's just say that I've been to several places across the country that one of the things that I hear is, well, the demographics aren't very different, like in our area, like it's like we're predominantly white or go into a predominantly black community, or,
Right.
And people groups tend to go together. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if we want to see the fullness of the beauty of God, then we need to look in areas that we've not looked before. And so if I want to see the fullness of God's beauty, I have to remember that, like, the color of my skin, your skin, I'm Greek and Filipino and Irish. So, like if I get out in the sun a little bit, I get pretty dark. Your color, and if there's somebody sitting with us that's black and somebody that's Asian, somebody that's Hispanic, we're all going to look differently. And the thing is that that's not a mistake. And so, like, one of the things that I'm asking people to stop saying, God is not colorblind. He did this on purpose.
Right.
And it represents who he is and the beauty of God. And so, do I think that it's a sin if our lives are homogenous? I don't know if I would go that far, but I would say that we're not seeing the fullness of his beauty if we're not trying to understand other people, other cultures, and I had somebody say to me, and I talk about, I forget what chapter it's in, but I had a friend of mine say to me, there's no people of color in my neighborhood or anywhere in this community, and it's a very wealthy community, multi-million-dollar homes. And this person said back to me, do you think I should just drag my kids downtown 45 minutes away from here just to go see colored people? And then they stopped and they were like, whoa, I didn't mean it to sound that bad. But it opened up a really good conversation, which is, I think that we should at least seek to understand people that are different than us. Now, I'm not saying that our lives are going to be completely and fully integrated in this lifetime, especially if you live in an area that is predominantly one race. But if we want to know God, we need to at least seek to understand that he did this on purpose, and the enemy is always trying to divide us. And so like even race, I mean, I'll jump into something here real quick that, is kind of a hot topic. Race is actually a man-made thing. Race is not made by God. So race was a tool created by men and women to divide and be able to classify a sociological classification. And so if it's a man-made thing, it's going to be imperfect in general. And what's happened is that we've been able to use race to then divide in ways that are really unhealthy. And so when we talk about economic injustice, if you just look at the maps, the sociological maps of predominantly high areas of poverty, in a lot of places there's concentrations of different races.
Right.
And so race is not a God thing, because we're one body, one family, and one family can't be a bunch of different races, right? We're one family in the body of Christ. And the more that we can understand that, the more that we can love each other, and learn to appreciate each other.
So, current culture tensions, cable news, social media, Black Lives Matter, Jacob Blake, Breonna Taylor, all these things that we hear all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
They sound different in Albemarle than they sounded when I lived in Baltimore.
Right.
It's a lot of the same messaging, but with different perspectives. So how do you see the church effectively responding and engaging with what we're hearing regarding racial disparity, racial injustice? Because quite honestly, when I walk around Albemarle, some of the things that I hear from folks are, well, there's just as much violence towards other people of color or towards white people as I hear here on. This is just being used as a political thing. You can't say Black Lives Matter because you're going to associate with an organization that,
Right.
and everybody starts putting on their tinfoil hats. You don't know what to believe.
Yeah.
You don't know how to respond. You don't know what to believe. And good luck pastoring during a pandemic when all this is happening anyway. So how do you see the church really wading through and hearing these messages and seeing this in a way that focuses on the love of Christ and the love for each other? Because quite honestly, it's very polarizing, because there's a group of our population that is incredibly hurting.
Yes.
There's another group of our population that feels that it's tragic, but there's more tragic things. And I'll say this, and then you can respond.
Yeah.
The Bishop T.D. Jakes said something years ago at an event I was at, and it's always stuck with me. And it was around this same dynamic with the church: racial disparity, the killing of a black man by a uniformed police officer, and he said, you know, what we have here, it's like a fever, and the fever is just going to get worse. Talk around all of that. Good luck. That's huge. I mean, this is the tension that we're living in as Christian Americans in the church right now.
So if we take all of that, what you just said, and there's a real grasp. I mean, you're coming from Baltimore, so there's a grasp of like, you've had to deal with a lot of the dynamics here, right? You're
personally, right?
Farther down the road than maybe some people that are even watching right now, because you've had to deal with it. And what I would say is that let's remember what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the greatest command, the most important thing that I can do, Jesus said, was to love him with full passion and to love my neighbor. And so when I look at that, what I say is my view of issues are not issues if you're my friend. So if you're different than me and you see something on the news, I see something on the news, and we see it very differently, that hot topic issue now is a matter of conversation between friends. And if we don't have friendships with people across dividing lines, we're always going to look at them as issues to be argued about instead of things to be resolved among our hearts and our friends. Because I would say something online, or I can say something to my friends that are like me that I might never say to you if you're from a different race or a different background than me. And so I think we have to always bring it back to, are we doing in the church what Jesus said was the most important thing? Am I delighting in Jesus? Am I delighting in Jesus right before I got into that argument with somebody about the news?
Oh man, that's just everywhere, right? Everybody in the church that I'm talking with, and this is, I'm not speaking in hyperbole. Every single person that I'm sitting down and praying with and talking with has got like social media fatigue because they got in another fight with somebody.
Yeah, and I think that we need to be aware that fatigue is sucking us away from delighting in Jesus, right? So I always try and bring this back to, gosh, if I'm going to do one thing right today, let me at least do the thing that Jesus said was most important out of everything else. So if I'm delighting in Jesus, he gives me a natural expression of loving my neighbors. And so the thing that I would say, you asked, part of the question was, what am I seeing around the country? How is the church responding to this? I'm actually really, I mean, maybe it's surprising. I'm actually kind of encouraged, depending on what I look at. But like, David prayed this prayer in the book of Psalms, and he says, search my heart, let me know any part of me that offends you. Now, what we have to remember there is that David is not going to the Lord and saying, forgive me of this. He's saying, there's something in me, in my heart, that I don't even know is there. So could we be courageous? I call it a prayer of implicit bias. Implicit bias is all of us have been raised to think a certain way, whether it's been explicitly taught to us or implicitly picked up by the way that we hear trusted adults, neighbors, mentors in our life, pastors, theologians. We have been trained explicitly, intentionally, or implicitly, which is more unintentional, just pick it up, but it's in us. And so the prayer of David says, Lord, help me to see the things that I didn't know are there. and then I can ask for forgiveness. And so if we take that prayer and we put it into the conversation about racial injustices and hot topic issues, the divisive political season that we're in, all of this stuff, there's a reason that I react when I see something on the news, because there's things inside of me that are embedded in me. But if I delight in Jesus and I'm spending time with him, and in the mornings I'm getting up and I'm saying, if I do one thing right today, just let me do the most important thing well. Let me love you and delight in you. And while we're at it, Lord, would you just uncover things that I don't even know are there, right? And so we all have to admit, and this might sound controversial and I don't mean it to, we all have biases. We all react a certain way when we see certain people. And that's across any dividing line, right? We are conditioned to react in certain ways to people. And so when we do that, that can be like a little flare that goes up and says, Lord, why did you do that? Lord, search my heart. Like, help me know, like, was there anything in there that I need? Because if I can have those intimate moments with the Lord where he searches me, then I can say, man, I was wrong. And maybe I need to apologize to somebody, or maybe I just need to spend some time delighting in Jesus and saying, Lord, would you help heal my heart?
But okay, so I on one hand I hear that, and that takes a great deal of humility.
Yeah.
There's no room for pride in that. But what happens when I'm speaking with someone and I know that they're in sin? Like, for instance, I know that the Carolina Tar Heels are the best team.
It's terrible.
And somebody else is a Duke fan, and I know they're wrong.
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yeah, we disagree.
Okay,
Yeah, we disagree on that.
All right, stupid example, but but real principle here is when I'm working with someone that I really disagree with.
Yeah.
What do I do with just like this justice thing that apparently comes from God? If it's godly justice, when I say forgive me, I'm literally saying, how do I do this when I'm literally across the table with someone I disagree with?
So I think we go back to the life of Jesus, right? One of my favorite scriptures in the entire Bible is, my answer to your question is, spend time together, enjoy each other in spite of differences, right? But to backfill that, one of my favorite scriptures is, it says that there was religious leaders that were sitting basically outside of what I would call a bar, right? And so there's a bunch of religious leaders that are outside just judging Jesus and judging everybody that's inside this establishment. And it says that Jesus is inside the establishment with disreputable sinners. And it just sets the scene. He's just enjoying time together. And the life of Jesus has showed that we don't have to agree on matters of faith to be friends. We don't have to agree on matters of politics to be friends. But what the enemy would want is he would want us to just viciously argue about things. And the final thing that I would say about that piece of it, Nate, would be, I can't remember the last time that I was dug in on a position of anything, and then somebody else was dug in. I can't remember the last time that some sort of ridiculous argument moved either of us. It just divided us more. I have begun to pray that the Lord would give me more curiosity and courage, because if we go back to the life of Jesus, the more time that he spent, so if we believe this really unpopular thing, and I believe it with every ounce of my being, that Jesus is truth. Capital T, truth. Absolute truth. In Jesus, I find my fulfillment in him. I find my forgiveness in him. If I believe that, that means that my relationship with somebody that I completely disagree with, the Holy Spirit will lead them into all truth. But also my perspective might change on something. Because I can look back. One of my favorite quotes is from Leonard Sweet. And he says, I don't agree with myself from 10 years ago. And Len, for those of you guys that don't know, has written 70 books. And he said, the difference between me and you, David, is that I wrote down the stuff that I don't agree with anymore. And so having a humble posture to say, I don't, tell me more about that instead of wanting to prove my point. I think that we can emulate and embody the life of Jesus in our relationships. And I have people that I completely disagree with that I'll just sit with and I'll say, hey, I just need you to know that I completely disagree with you. I'd love to hear more on that,
Yeah.
but I don't agree with it, and I don't think my faith is my motivation for every part of my life, and that may not be where you're coming from. But even in the way that you just kind of see that happening, I'm leaving room for them to respect the fact that I respect them.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that would be a question that I would like ask everybody that's listening: is do people respect you with the opinions that you have? Because we may not agree on everything, but it's the way that we treat each other that's going to help us lead into all truth.
So I'm in a unique position where I'm now pastoring in the community that I grew up in as a child.
Wow.
And it's really eye-opening, and it's actually been fun so far. Just I'm wondering when the nostalgia might wear off.
Right.
But I went as a child. I lived here through about age 17, 18. I went to lots of different churches.
Yeah.
I went to a Pentecostal Holiness Church, to a Foursquare Church, non-denominational church. We did the Southern Baptist thing for a little bit. You know, we went, and one of the things that I can really connect with people on here in Stanley County is, man, we got hurt in church a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, to me, that's something in our county that I see over and over and over again when I'm working with folks and praying with them. And I think that in the 80s and 90s, way back in the day when I was growing up, way back, one of the things that constantly was kind of hammered into our faith and our religion is this idea that your beliefs and your disagreements with what this statement of beliefs is that I'm in, if you don't agree with this, you're bad, and I should avoid you, and I can't be tainted by you. And what you're describing really puts a powder keg under that belief system. Yeah. And I think rightfully so. Yeah. I think rightfully so. Yeah. I think that tension that was really conditioned in my religious atmospheres in my upbringing was very damning. And actually, when I look back, it's probably the source of much of the hurt that a lot of us encountered. That dynamic seems to, in the church, to be making its way even into these dividing lines culturally and politically. If you don't believe the way I do, we can't coexist. You can't be my pastor, you can't be my friend, I can't do this, you can't come over to our house. And I see that all over our county in a very, it grieves me, because I see the hurt that comes from it.
Yes.
A lot of people right now talk about deconstruction. Deconstructing my faith, what I grew up in, whatever. There's so many definitions on this thing. But is there a level, or is there is there a recommended way, or is there something that you see in Scripture, maybe even that you spoke to in the book, that is a practical way of saying, okay, this is my conditioning. This is how I see the world. What's the non-threatening or the spoonful of sugar way to help the medicine go down, to go, how would you advise somebody to come to awareness of that might be jacked up a little bit? Right. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
Or is that too abstract?
No. I think you're spot on, because I think, honestly, what you just said there, I think that people need to rewind 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and just listen to that again, because I think that a lot of people grew up that way. Yeah. A lot of people that would watch this probably grew up that way. And so I think that even between me and you, 20 years of friendship, we're growing even in this conversation, right? We're saying stuff and going, I'm listening to you go, man, I never really thought about that piece of it before. I think what I would say is, you said, what's a way for the medicine to go down? Because you referred to it as a fever. So if this fever started, generations ago.
T.D. Jakes referred to it. This is not my fault. This is his fault. Yeah.
But the fever is getting out of control, right? Right. I would say that maybe everybody that is watching right now can just look at this and remember that education is action. Okay. So taking time to maybe read something that is, and we can,
Neighborliness by David Docusen.
Neighborliness. Even on the neighborliness.com, there's a recommended reading list.
Oh, okay.
At the back of the book, there, if people don't like to read, there's recommended videos. There's, different ways to take in information.
Right.
But the thing is that what education does is it helps shape the mind, right? So for me, if I need to explore something that I don't understand, there's no way around educating myself on it if I'm ever going to want to understand it. And so I think that that people being reminded that education is action is really important. Like, if you're just now being awakened to racial and economic injustices, you probably shouldn't be the one leading a march or leading a movement, because you want to have some substance there.
Look to those who have been doing it and learn from them.
And there's so many trusted voices,
Yeah.
even in the body of Christ, like
Right.
Jamar Tisby with The Color of Compromise, a guy that's our age named Drew Hart,
Yeah.
that did Trouble I've Seen, just did a book that helps people understand nonviolent protest. It's such a timely thing because he just wrote a book called Who Will Be a Witness? And it's a biblical approach to nonviolent protest. And so that's something that I'm reading right now because I don't have a full understanding of, no matter how much I've studied. I wasn't there with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and I haven't been a part of a lot of nonviolent protests, right? So I want to understand it. So what am I doing? I'm taking the time to listen, learn, and grow. And so those are the three things that I would say within education as action. I would break it down into three things: humbly listen, learn, and grow.
So we have your book. Looks like you brought a journal. Was there something just on your heart, or was there something out of the book that you're like, I gotta say this to people? I just got to make time for this message or this phrase or this thing.
Yeah, I bring the journal everywhere I go because I write stuff down all the time.
Right.
And so that's one way that I remember that if I'm learning something. So there's some things that you've said that after we get off here, I just need to write it down, or else I'm gonna forget it. Right. So I bring the journal everywhere I go. As it relates to the book, I think if there's one thing that I would hope, we've actually already covered it, and it would be that maybe we could look at our lives and begin each day saying, am I doing the thing that Jesus said was the most important thing? Am I delighting in him? And am I working to understand my neighbors? Now, you know my wife really well.
We went to high school together.
Yeah. She said to me, she read the book, and I was in the editing process, and she goes, man, I loved it, that was really good. And she said, there's some parts where I laughed, I cried. It was very accessible, like it wasn't, like harsh. And she said, but I completely disagreed with something you said. And I was like, all right, here we go, And she said, you said that if I don't understand somebody, I can't love them. And I said, what's the problem? And she said, I love you. And she's like, I don't understand you. And she's like, I don't understand when you come in here and you know that I love a clean house and you just throw your shoes wherever you want to throw them. And we've been together for 20 years and I still don't understand you, but I love you.
Yeah.
And she said, I love you because I'm seeking to understand you. And so I was like, whatever. And then, I went back and made the edits.
You edited that.
Yeah. But I think that's what I would want people to say is, am I doing what Jesus said was most important? Am I delighting in him? Because we can't forget that all of this life is about finding and knowing the fulfillment of knowing Jesus, right? That's what I believe. That's what I've given my whole life to. And this conversation can be really distracting because it's so volatile. So are we delighting in him? And then are we seeking, as Darrow would say, seeking to understand our neighbors?
Yeah.